Welcome to Australian Hiker, your online hiking resource. We're your hosts, Tim and Jill Savage.
This is episode 159 of the Australian Hiker podcast. In our last episode, episode 158, we talked about snowshoeing in the Australian Alps. But for those of you that want to take this a step further, there are other options which include skiing. In this episode, we catch up with Gary Tischer, who we've previously interviewed, and find out about options for skiing away from the resorts. We talk about safety and logistics in the backcountry in general terms, and you'll find out more than you ever wanted to know about what to do with toilet waste in the snow. To round off this episode, we catch back up with Bruce Easton from Wilderness Sports about options for getting a taster in backcountry skiing. We hope you enjoy. So today we're catching up with Gary Tischer to talk about backcountry snow sports. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us, Gary.
It's a pleasure, Tim. Yeah, it's great. And I heard you went snowshoeing last weekend, I believe.
We did, a couple of weekends ago, and yeah, it was enjoyed it. Definitely a good learning curve and definitely a good physical workout.
Well, snowshoeing would be one of the first ways to get into backcountry touring, unless you're a competent cross-country skier. So, yeah, that's a great start.
All right. So what do we mean by backcountry snow sports? What does backcountry mean?
Backcountry really means, so you've got the resorts, and if you stay within their if you downhill ski, you're often kept within their boundaries. So backcountry is really anything that's not supported by a resort and takes you away from those resorts. An introduction to backcountry can just only be a few kilometres away from those resorts or roads and that sort of thing, and that'd be the best way to start. But it really means that you're out there on your own, coping with non-groomed trails or actually no trails at all. So you're heading cross-country across the snow. So backcountry can mean, say, 3 k's from a resort, or it can mean 25 kilometres away, or even longer.
And that's what we did with the snowshoeing last weekend. We were really within about 3.5 sort of kilometres of the resort itself. Went out, turned around, came back. But yeah, definitely creating our own trails and working off nice, fresh, powdery sort of snow.
That's right. And when you're backcountry, you're going to cover all sorts of conditions, from beautiful fresh snow conditions to icy conditions to no snow at all. In some patches that you might have to pick up your skis or snowshoes and walk across. So that's one of the things you have to understand about backcountry tour. You're gonna hit lots of different conditions and lots of different weather if you stay out there for a few days. All
right. Now, why would you want to go ski touring or snowshoeing or skiing in the backcountry? What are the benefits?
Well, what drew me to backcountry touring, and it was mainly ski touring. I didn't snowshoe till some years after the skiing. It was walking particularly the snowy mountains, which are perfect for backcountry touring in the winter. As they are great for hiking during the summer, I wanted to see what places like Mount Jagungal and some of the huts were like under snow. And so that was my main reason for taking up cross-country skiing and backcountry touring and snow camping.
Okay. And I suppose really as well, and when the ski season is in full swing as opposed to the COVID version we've got at the moment, there are a lot of people, and I know when we drove up to do the snowshoeing, there were a lot of cars on the road, even when we got there fairly early. So I'm guessing when you're in the backcountry, you've got a bit more privacy and a bit more serenity that you're normally going to pick up away from the resorts.
Absolutely, and that really is one of the attractions of getting out past the resorts, because it becomes incredibly quiet out in the snow. You'll hear the occasional bird. We've come across wombats actually in the snow, but it's very, very quiet, and it's very peaceful away from the lifts. And you have the place to yourselves, and you may be in a valley or on a hillside with no other tracks, and that's a fabulous experience.
I must admit, I mean, as I said, with our snow sharing last weekend, we came across one group doing some training on the way up, and right towards the end of the trail, we came across another group of people doing snowshoeing as well. But otherwise, it was just the three of us for pretty much most of the day. So, as you say, it was pretty peaceful, and it was pretty amazing, which is something I never really considered before. That's always something that's put me off the snow fields, just the sheer number of people. Whereas, as you say, getting out in the open, getting out in the remote areas, you get that privacy.
Absolutely. It's just beautiful out in the backcountry around in the Snowy Mountains, and it's fairly easy to access. You can park in the resorts, or you can go to places like Guthica is a good place to start, and Guthica Power Station is one of the favourites of people to start. But also you can Mount Selwyn, and if you're in Victoria, places like Mount Sterling are also a great place to start. So you stay away from Mount Buller, head to Mount Sterling, and it's a lot quieter and more peaceful.
I must admit, I have been up around Guthica Power Station before, but funnily enough, it was ice diving. I was in the water. I wasn't actually on the snow at that stage.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so it's probably the once you've decided you want to go into the backcountry, it probably, if you've got no snow knowledge at all, no snow experience, it's best to go with someone who has experience, either on a guided trip or join a club. I joined the New South Wales Nordic Ski Club many years ago, and that was a great introduction. I'm not sure if they're still operating or not, but that was a really good way of getting out and gaining experience with other people who already had it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, as you know, it's one thing going out bushwalking. I mean, you know, if you're familiar with that, and we always do tend to recommend, if you're new to bushwalking, go with someone that can help you, or go with a group, or go with a club. And I think you're right. I think going with a commercial operator or going with a club where someone can look after you and teach you the ropes is definitely the way to go.
Definitely. With cross country skiing, there's easier ways to do it. Basically, you have to learn to be lazy when you cross-country ski, and that's the most efficient way to do it. It's not walking on skis; it's actually skiing, and you want to slide as much as you can, and that doesn't come natural to most people or anyone probably. So just a 2-hour lesson before you start, and go around the Perisher Trails or Mount Sterling Trails, Mount Baw Baw maybe, and just get your feet into skiing, or just understand the sliding. And I've taken people from Queensland down for a ski tour, a trip, and it was interesting that one of the people thought that, well, you point skis to go down, and they go down, so the opposite to that is to point them up the hill. But unfortunately, they'll go backwards. So, so if you don't want to go anywhere on your skis, go put the skis across the slope. And that would be my first tip.
Okay, now before we talk about gear itself, I mean, you've got the option when you're going backcountry to do just a day, or potentially to go longer and actually camp in the snow as well. What are the differences with snow camping as opposed to camping for bushwalking?
Not a lot, actually. I think these days people are trying to minimise weight as much as you can. However, that would be the biggest difference. With camping in the snow, you really have to have equipment that will cope with high winds and cold temperatures, because if you don't, the snow, it will kill you. Just because exposure, when a blizzard comes through, the winds are high, it gets very cold, and you need to have good gear to cope with that. Now, most of your bushwalking gear will cope really well. Your waterproofs, your Gore-Texes, your fleeces, your down jackets, all that sort of thing. will be completely fine. But you do have to, I think, sleeping bag, tent are the two things that you really have to have. A 2 or 3 season tent will be very cold. If it's only got a mesh inner, then it'll be quite cold. And if it's only a single layer tent, that'll be particularly cold, unless you've got a very good sleeping bag.
Now, I think from memory, 4-season tents tend to be either a solid inner or mainly solid inner layer, don't they?
That's correct, yeah. They'll have a nylon inner rather than just your mesh. And they'll normally have probably at least 2 to 3 poles and be freestanding. It would be better to have a freestanding tent in the snow.
Okay, so we've just talked about using 4-season tents, and these are tents that will cope with snow. You mentioned that there are a couple of other options that you can use as well?
Yes, one trip, or quite a few trips actually. I took a tent which was called a Megamid. I'm not sure if it's available now. It's basically a pyramid-style tent. So it was about 2 metres or 2.5 metres on each side, 4 sides, and then a centre pole. So we took that, and that was our mess tent. So when there were about 6 or 7 of us, and we were able to set that up and put the centre pole up and create a table in the centre, and then dig down into the snow. So we actually had chairs with backs, and all 6 or 7 of us could sit around inside that tent at night in the snow, having dinner or cooking dinner on the snow table. And that was a very pleasant experience. And the thing about huts too is if you camp outside the huts, and you meet a lot of interesting people inside the hut. So people might be preparing their meals in the huts together. Often there can be a fire, and so it's very communal, and a lot of like-minded people are out there, and I've certainly made some lifelong friends that I've met in those particular cattlemen's huts in the middle of blizzards.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so let's talk about time of the year. I mean, obviously you've got to have snow to be able to go do some snow sports,
Yep.
and in Australia our snowfields certainly aren't as good as Europe or America in that sense. But when typically is the ski season or the snow season in Australia?
The snow season for the downhillers will go from, say, the June long weekend, if you're lucky, through till perhaps September. Now, in Australia, for cross-country, you can go probably earlier than that and later than that onto the higher peaks, such as the Alps around Kosciuszko. The best time I find, and I live in Queensland, so I would have to head down quite a few times and hope that the snow was there, and also hope for good weather. So I would go in the last week of August. And why I would do that is there'd be quite a good snow depth, which is what you want for backcountry touring. And also the days are a little bit longer, and the weather is starting to get more stable. You don't want it to be, you want it to be cold, but you don't want it to be lots of fronts coming through and blizzardy. So last week in August, if you can manage it, is probably the best in my books.
And does it really matter what you're doing at that time, or is it pretty much suits everybody at that sort of period?
Probably suit anyone who wants to go backcountry. Although if you're skiing, if you want to go backcountry snowboarding, even actually, that's become more common in the last few years. They will be looking for steeper slopes, and probably even later into September and October, so they can get up to the high peaks and ski spring snow, which is pretty good. Spring snow is basically during the day the temperatures warm up, so there'll be a softer layer of a few centimetres. It'll melt overnight. Problem with that, it may freeze overnight as well, and then you've got ice. So there's you've got to understand basically the weather, how the weather works in alpine regions, how fronts work. When a front goes through, it'll often bring rain and high winds. Being in the snow in rain is not a lot of fun. But once the front goes through and the temperatures are really cold, it's a very pleasant environment in terms of it's very dry, which is you wouldn't consider that. So your Gore-Texes work much better than in a humid, wet conditions, and it can be beautiful blue skies, and you're out in wonderful scenery and landscapes, and knowing your weather as well. And so my reason for going, say, in later August is your weather's more stable. You're going to have longer periods of more stable weather and blue skies.
Now, one of the things we asked this question when we went snowshoeing last weekend, and we said, what is it that cancels at least from a commercial operation perspective, what is it that cancels a likely snow trip? And what we were told was a drop in temperature. Rain and high winds tend to be the thing that's when that becomes an issue with hypothermia, or potentially an issue with hypothermia. Is that the sort of stuff you typically want to avoid, or is it, obviously it'd be lovely to have sunny conditions all the time, but I can imagine that's not always going to be the case.
No, it's not going to be the case. And I took a group down from Queensland, as I said, and we planned to go out at a certain date, but the weather on that date was quite warm, actually, and quite wet. There was an east coast low, funnily enough. There's been a few this year, and it was dumping more rain and warm temperatures into the Alps. So we had to wait until a nice cold front came through, because once you get wet, and then the temperatures drop, then that freezes, so all your wet gear can freeze, and that's not particularly pleasant, and more dangerous than, say, the colder dry temperatures.
Yep. Okay, before we go sort of start talking logistics, let's talk a bit about the activities themselves. So we talked about snowshoeing in our last podcast, but in relation to skiing, I believe that we're not talking about downhill skiing here. We're talking about backcountry. What is it about backcountry, and what are the types of skiing that typically people do in the backcountry?
In the backcountry, primarily it's cross-country skis. Now, if you're at places like Perisher, you'll see across the road from the main resort, there's some cross-country trails, and you'll see a lot of cross-country ski races on those. Although they're a good place to practice your cross-country technique. The backcountry skis are generally wider. They're definitely wider than the standard racing skis. However, they're thinner and longer than your typical downhill ski. And if you're familiar with downhill skis, they're relatively short, and the boots are very solid plastic boots which are locked in toe and heel. Cross-country skis are narrower, longer. The boots pivot at the toe, and there's a few different mechanisms to do that, but that's how they work. So you actually can, it's not walking. It's more a slide. You're stepping and you're sliding and stepping and sliding, and so you want to be able to lift your heel up to do that. And so cross-country skis will go uphill quite easily. They'll have a pattern underneath which will be able to grab hold of the snow crystals, allowing you to get up to, I couldn't say the degrees in the slope, but you can ski up a lot of slopes, and when it starts to get too hard, you then can traverse and contour up it as you would do perhaps walking.
Yeah. And I've heard things like, was it telemarking and things like that? What does that mean?
Telemarking is a form of heading downhill on cross-country skis, and you'll see it in resorts. You'll see it in backcountry. It's a very difficult technique to do, actually, where you're dropping one knee, the trailing knee, and with your heel out of the sort of off the ski, and you're doing nice sweeping turns. And when you see someone doing it well in deep snow, it's just magic to watch. But it's a very difficult technique. So for most people going on cross-country skis at first, the good old snow plow is the best way to stop initially.
Yep.
And if you find you're going too fast, you plant your backside. And you will fall over, definitely fall over. But the good thing about where you're skiing is the snow is generally relatively soft compared to a lot of the resorts.
Right. And that makes a difference, does it?
Absolutely. In terms of falling over, yep.
Okay. All right. Yep.
And it makes it a lot more fun in some ways. It makes it more difficult if you're trying to cut a trail in snow that you're sinking down up to your shins in. So, yeah, you can travel long distances on cross-country skis even with a pack. You can do 20 to 25 kilometres even. Whereas if you were snowshoeing, you couldn't do anywhere near that.
Yeah.
And with different boots, and you're best off going and hiring, certainly in the beginning, hiring those skis, getting some tips. And if you're used to downhill skis, they are a lot harder. So you'll get the hang of it, but don't expect to be an expert.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it's like anything you're doing the first time or second time. It's a learning process, and it takes a bit of a period until you know what you're doing and make it look easy.
Yeah, and it's hard work, but what you can do, even a couple of ways away from a resort, it's a whole new world in the snow, and it's just incredibly beautiful. So it's worth trying, and you might fall in love with it.
Okay, now going back to some of the logistics again, certainly as you mentioned before, safety is a big issue with that, and we I believe that layering is very similar to hiking, that you have various layers to keep you warm without being so hot you start sweating. Yeah,
definitely, and multiple layers is best, and certainly fabrics which will stay warm when wet, because it's quite hard work, so you will build up a sweat. On two particular days over the years, I've had members of the group only wear a thermal underneath a rain jacket or Gore-Tex or Japara, and twice that person, or there were two different people on two different occasions, but they became hypothermic as the temperature dropped, and we had to basically set up camp on the side of hills. And they were fit people who had done it before. So you've just got to be very careful. I will tend to wear a thermal and a fleece, and this is in if sort of cloudy conditions or windy conditions, and a Gore-Tex. And even if the fleece does get quite damp, it'll dry out and keep you warm at the same time. Whereas, going too little, you can get yourself in trouble.
Okay, well, we talked a bit about four-season tents earlier, and I suppose one of the things that I hear people having problems with is when they're cooking near or in their tents at the end of the day. Now, what's the problem there?
Okay, well, snow gives you a great advantage, actually, of cooking in your tent, because if you camp on snow, and that's actually, I mentioned this now, is when you set up a tent on the snow, it's very different to setting up a tent on the ground. What you want to do is compact the area of snow where your footprint of the tent would be, compact that down with either your skis or your snowshoes, let it get cold for a little while, put your tent up, set it up over that area and throw your sleeping mats in, but don't get in for a little while if you can help it. The reason for that is then that compressed layer will then refreeze or just compact down and freeze, and become a nice flat layer to sleep on. But in the vestibule of your tent, you can actually dig that out, which is very handy. So if you dig it out so you can eventually sit in your tent with your feet and your legs down into the pit that you dig in your vestibule.
Yep.
So it's about knee height. And then you can cook in that as well. And it's really quite a safe way to cook, because the problem with cooking, it produces carbon monoxide, which you can't smell, and it will kill you. And so you have to be careful of that. And unfortunately, that has happened in the high country, particularly in snow caves. Some years ago, 1 year I was out there were 3 snowboarders who that unfortunately happened to. So that's a very real threat as well. So, cook in the pit, sort of, and the carbon monoxide sinks.
Right. Rather than sinking to the bottom of your tent.
Yeah, so you want something lower than where you're sleeping.
Okay. Now, what other safety things do we need to be aware of? So we've got hypothermia, we've got to worry about carbon monoxide. What other safety issues do we need to be conscious about when we're doing any sort of activity in the backcountry?
Eating well is one thing that you need to make sure that you've got enough food. There was a case quite a few years ago now of a couple of guys who were out, and they essentially ran out of food and got caught in bad weather, and that had a pretty negative effect on their survivability out in those conditions. So make sure you have plenty of food, eat as much as you like, because you're going to burn more calories than you can carry.
Okay, so now you mentioned there are a couple of other safety issues as well we need to be conscious of. What are they?
Well, in the snow, you'll hear people when they're hiking talking about whiteouts when they might be walking along a trail or top of a mountain and the cloud come in. Yeah, sure, that's a whiteout. But when you get in snow, it's a real whiteout, because once you're in cloud in the snow, it's difficult to know which way's up. And I've been on my skis thinking I'm stopped, and then I realised the stocks are dragging, which I'm sort of rolling down the hill or sliding down the hill. And also things when you're in a whiteout, things that you think are a long way away, you see a dark object, you think that looks like a big rock, but then you get up close in a few seconds, it's a small shrub. So it's very difficult to navigate in whiteouts in the snow. And you can ski along and you can ski straight into the side of a slope without realising that it's there.
Yeah.
So you have to be a little bit aware of where you are, particularly if you're on the top of a mountain, and even if you ski up to the top of Kosciuszko, you need to know where you are, because you don't want to be sliding off a cornice, even up on Kosciuszko if you've come up from Thredbo. So be aware of where you are, and GPSs are probably the easiest way these days to do that. So, use your phone and download an app like Gaia or something else. Problem is with phones and any electrical device, you'll need batteries, and cold temperatures will make those batteries run out very quickly. So keep it close to you and keep it inside a coat pocket, and also take a PLB. That's a personal location beacon. So if you do get out there, even if you're heading up just for the day, it's always a good idea. So if you find yourself stuck and completely lost, you can always activate that. It may take some time for people to get to you, depending on the conditions, though.
Yeah, I must admit, when I am using batteries, I tend to use lithium batteries, and they are fairly expensive, but they just tend to last longer. And as you say, keeping them nice and close to you to keep the battery and the unit nice and warm, so it does last a bit longer.
Yes, definitely. And even if you are camping in the snow, put any batteries or electrical devices inside the sleeping bag with you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you may wake up to no batteries left.
Yeah, no, that's always the thing. It's sort of you can go through an awful lot of batteries very quickly, particularly when you're running GPSs.
Absolutely, yeah, yep. But having said this, it sounds like it's a really dangerous thing to do, and if you're not aware of what you're doing, yes, it can be, but it's such a beautiful, challenging place, but it can be a lot of fun. And I took my 13-year-old daughter snow camping, and she felt it hard, but she loved it. And so don't be put off, but understand the risks, I suppose, and you can easily manage those.
Now, I suppose the obvious question here, going to the toilet when you're out in the middle of a snowfield, what are the differences there? I mean, I think it's probably going to be a bit hard to dig through 2 or 3 foot of snow to get soil layer, but what do you do?
And I looked up the rules for Kosciuszko at the moment, and if you're backcountry, you need to pack it out. And the reason for that is that you're quite correct that you can't reach the soil level to dig your 6 inches down what you'd normally do hiking. And what was happening is people snow camping were going to the toilet and it just sitting on top of the snow. It may have been buried under the snow, but as that melted, it then would be sitting on top of the ground and then be washed down into the glacial lakes and the water areas, the rivers. So if you're backcountry and away from the huts, you need to carry it out, and that will be mainly in the Alps area. Dotted around both the Victorian and New South Wales ski areas, alpine areas, are old cattlemen's huts. And these have been upkept by hiking and cross-country skiing groups, and they're great places to go because in most of those there are pit toilets. So that's what I'd be recommending, that if you're going snow camping, particularly in the early days, head towards the huts and hut hop, but always take a tent as well.
Yep.
So then the toileting doesn't become an issue. And obviously for males, it's a lot easier. And for the ladies, unfortunately, it's away from the resorts and toilets. It can be a bit cold, but you learn to be very quick.
Now, when you say pack it out, I know in the States they have things called wag bags. What do we use in Australia to pack toilet waste out in?
There's a few different ways of doing it. I've seen people with poo tubes, basically PVC pipes that you get down at Bunnings and having a screw-on end on both ends and basically having that on the side of the tent. Oh, it's just not the size of the tent, side of the pack.
Yeah.
These days there are chemical solutions that infected powders that will turn human waste into solid, basically, and so it's a lot easier to carry in heavy duty plastic bags. So probably I'd be looking into that sort of solution rather than just having a PVC pipe full of plain human waste.
Yep. Okay, so still on logistics, what about food? Is there anything different with food for backcountry snow sports compared to hiking, or is it pretty much the same?
With food with backcountry snow camping, you're actually in a big fridge, so you can take whatever you like, and which is so nice. You can take fresh meat, that can be chicken. We've even had chicken as well, and you can take that. Although the chicken, I'd start off and eat that the first night. But you can take lots of things and it won't go off, which is really nice. And so basically fresh food is great. Also water you don't have to worry about. Whereas you think on the Larapinta Trail or lots of drier tracks, you've got to carry a lot of water. You don't have to in the snow because you've got essentially water all around you with the snow. A couple of tricks in melting that snow is to use a billy and on top of your stove and put a little bit of water in the billy first and then pack your snow in on top. So that way that the hot water will conduct that heat through the snow and it'll melt a lot quicker.
Yeah.
If you just put straight snow in, it can take quite a while. So that's a reduction in weight there. And if you can reach some of the streams, which are beautiful and clear. However, I would still either boil that water or filter it or use a SteriPen on it because there is E. coli up in the Alps.
Yeah.
And this is what's come from the human waste being around, and now the animals have got that in their systems. And so even though the water looks beautiful and clear, you best treat it. Otherwise, you don't want to get sick in the snow.
Yeah. Now, I believe as well there's an issue with that's typically not an issue with from a hiking perspective, but that when you are cooking in the Alps, that the gas canisters don't tend to last as long because of the altitude.
Yep, that is true. What you need to do is I'll use a jet boil if I'm using gas, and they have a mix which is made for colder conditions. So definitely don't skimp on that. Otherwise, you'll find that the normal butane that you might get down at BCF won't do the job. Also, for some years, I carried a Trangia, which is great, using metho.
Yep.
And that's quite an efficient thing to use. And a trick there is you can, and for hiking as well, you can add about 10% water to your metho. So carry metho, and when you put it in your little burner, add a little bit of water to it. It'll make it go further, and you won't have that problem of soot underneath your cooking pans and pots.
Yeah, I must admit, in the days when I used to use Trangias on a regular basis, that was always an issue. Now, these days I still will use Trangia pots, but I tend to use the canister type stoves, either the jet boils or the MSRs, just for convenience.
They are very convenient. So the idea there is certainly buy the canisters that are good in cold temperatures.
Yeah.
Also, a couple of things with the food preparation is once you've finished preparing it and you want to clean up, take some rubber gloves, just some that you buy at Woolies, or because they will make your life so much easier when you're going out into the snow in sub-zero temperatures and cleaning your pots, and your hands won't get cold at all. So that's another thing. And also, you can have ice cream if you want when you're out there. You can mix some, say, condensed milk with some flavours. You can even make jelly because you are living in a fridge.
Yeah. I must admit, I get strange looks. I love ice cream in the middle of winter, and people look at me strangely and thinking, it's a summertime or a heat time food, but winter time is a good time for ice cream as well.
Yeah, I must admit I haven't been a big fan of it, but I have seen people do it. I'd rather have the hot chocolate instead.
Okay, so we've been talking with Gary Tisher about backcountry snow sports. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Tim. It's been a pleasure.
Now, next we catch up with Bruce Easton from Wilderness Sports in Jindabyne, and just touching base about options and alternatives for getting out in the backcountry. Okay, so last week we talked about snowshoeing specifically. Now, I believe Wilderness Sports also does ski touring as well. Tell us a bit about what you have on offer in relation to getting people out on skis.
Ski touring, so many different aspects for different people. If you're an alpine skier, then locking your heel down is a pretty important characteristic, but when the lifts are not there, you've got to hike up the hill, and that's where climbing skins or possibly a broader pattern base make a bit of a difference. If you're a cross-country skier and used to skiing around the trails, then you're looking at something more like a wider, slightly broader ski, but still will have a pattern on it. and it's a bit more like a bushwalking sort of setup. And then we've also got the hybrid version, which is like telemarking, where basically you've got a pattern-based ski, a cable binding. So ski touring's a massive variety of things, and really it's determined a little bit by what your plan is, whether you're just going out to literally climb up the hill so that you can turn around and ski down off that summit, or whether you're actually going to travel out to some of the huts, like out towards Tagungal or up to Schlink, or those sort of places where, you know, it's 10 kilometres to go in and you wouldn't really be necessarily going up on a pair of alpine touring skis. But strangely enough, there are people who do that. They just happen to be a bit fitter and a little bit more adventurous.
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing. I mean, there's so much choice these days, and if you're into an activity, whether it be snowshoeing or skiing, and you love it, you just keep on doing it.
Yeah, and again, I guess that's one of the things that sets us apart, because we're in a position with our guiding business where we can show people how to make the most of that activity, no matter which equipment you choose, so that you learn and understand how to be a little more efficient. You understand the performance and limitations of the equipment, and you can start to be a little more efficient. So things like packing your skins away, how to use ski crampons. There are products also that just make it a little safer. So attaching your skis to a pack, as much as that might sound a very simple sort of thing, being able to do that efficiently and, you know, taking into account the fact that might be, you know, 50 to 70 plus kilometre-hour winds, the wind chill because it's quite cold, all of those things start to become a little more relevant. And because we've got such an extensive hire of all of this equipment, it gives people an opportunity to basically try different things to find out what the most ideal equipment is to actually achieve the goals and the adventures and the experiences that they want to enjoy the most from their limited time that they have in the mountains.
Now, if someone was interested in skiing and they didn't want to do downhill skiing, but they wanted to do something a bit more backcountry-ish, what would you recommend they start off with? What's the skiing activity that's really going to hook people into backcountry skiing?
Well, this is where often, you know, just in talking through the array of different equipment available, often we encourage people to look at something like a 3-hour tour, where they can actually learn the basics and start to understand a little bit more about why it's important to, you know, have a pack that's got a little bit of spare equipment, you know, another base layer or something like that, spare pair of gloves, sunglasses, goggles, a hat, you know, sun protection just as much as cold weather, and how to be really efficient with that. Because once you're in the alpine environment, you know, you really need to make the most of your experience, to have some of those things just to make it comfortable. Yeah. And that's the secret with, you know, those sort of tours, is once you've got the right equipment, then you can make the most of the trip that you're planning. And so you need to factor in, you know, where you're going, how to get there more efficiently. So you've got to look at the weather, start to understand the snow conditions a little bit as well. If it's going to be an icy day, then basically you're out for a bit of a journey and go sightseeing, because you're not going to be able to enjoy the down as much as you might have anticipated. Other days, it's more about the down and trying to find somewhere, for example, in the trees where it might be really windy and, you know, there's a lot of fresh snow. So looking for destinations that get you into the tree line that allow you to make the most of those conditions is the ideal way to look at it. So something like a 3-hour tour or something like that tends to be the best way. And then you can start to look at what you might do for a full day, where you start to journey more into the advanced alpine terrain, and also you've got a better understanding then of what it's like to ski and tour off-piste and use your equipment to its full advantage.
So again, we've been talking with Bruce Easton about options for skiing in the Australian Alps and backcountry. Bruce, thank you for your time.
Thank you once again, Tim. It's awesome to encourage people, and we certainly look forward, whether it's through the winter months when the resorts are operating or when they close down. There's certainly plenty of other opportunities people can come down and still continue to experience the alpine environment.
Okay, so we've heard from both Gary and Bruce in relation to backcountry activities, including skiing and backcountry camping. Gary asked me to convey that backcountry travel in winter is a bit like an ocean. On a calm day, it looks beautiful and even sublime, but you need to be prepared for those days that do happen regularly when the wind is gale force, the temperature is freezing and the snow is piling up. The calm days after the cold front has passed are probably the reason you are out in the backcountry, away from the crowds and enjoying nature at its best. So really, in that sort of respect, yes, we talked a lot about the negatives, but it was more so you can be prepared than anything else.
If you have a look at the photos attached to the podcast, you'll see there are some really stunning, absolutely stunning images. And I think that's what he's talking about. That's why you go and do it, and that's why you do all that preparation and possibly expect the worst on the basis that you're going to get some of that really beautiful countryside and quite almost serene landscape that you'll be camping in.
And I think the thing is an overall perspective. I mean, I've done quite a lot of hiking up in the Australian Alps, and as has Jill. But looking at it in the middle of summer, when you can see everything, you can see the creeks, you can see the hollows, you can see all the dips and the drop-offs. Whereas wintertime, when it's covered in snow, a lot of that stuff tends to be hidden. So the navigation becomes a bit more important, and the safety aspects become a bit more important as well. So going through Gary's interview to start with, I mean, he talked about basically having a guided experience if this is new to you. And that's from our perspective. In the previous episode, we talked about snowshoeing, and we did have a guided experience, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But having someone that knows what they're doing, whether it be a club or an experienced friend or a commercial operator that can take you out and make the experience so much better, is definitely the way to go. We talked about snow camping, and again, this is something definitely a bit different. For a lot of people, it might be you just go out for a day or half a day and that's it. But if you want to go a bit more involved and actually camp in the snow, there's a bit more involved. And while a lot of your gear may be suitable for you, getting a good 4-season tent that's going to cope with the weight of the snow and keep you warm when it is quite cold at night time is pretty essential. We covered things like having a good sleeping bag, talked about how to set up in the snow, and we also talked about, of avoiding the wet weather, which is something we repeated from last week. It's okay being in wet weather, but you want to make sure whatever you're wearing, you stay dry. So if once your clothing gets wet and you're out in the open, that's when you can potentially have issues. We looked at skiing options, and again, Gary did also mention snowboarding as well as becoming more popular in the backcountry. It gets you away from the crowds. And I think that's the big thing with getting away from the resorts. I have never really seen and I'm not quite sure the word I'm looking for.
The attraction, maybe?
That's the one.
I don't know.
I've never really seen the attraction with going up and down on a ski lift all day. There's a lot of people in the world that enjoy it. But for me personally, I'd rather get away from the crowds and get out and into the environment. And that means getting out into the backcountry and doing something different. So everybody has different preferences. And if the crowds aren't it, backcountry may be the way to go. It was interesting looking at the safety aspects. Obviously, hypothermia, being in a cold environment, is something you need to be prepared for. Eating well, and again, that's never an issue from my perspective. Although, having said that, The day we went snowshoeing, I didn't actually eat a lot. I was toasty and warm. But for me, when I exert myself, I lose appetite. So, certainly if you're going out for a period of days, you need to make sure you have good meals at least through the end of the day, if not during the day, to make sure you keep the energy up.
I think it's not just the energy. I think you need to keep your metabolism moving, and that will help keep you warm as well.
We did start looking at some of the negatives, so things like whiteouts and navigation. And as I said, from my perspective, I have seen areas in wintertime and in summer where you would not know there's a drop-off or a deep creek in the area you're about to walk through. And this is where map reading and having things like GPSs that are going to keep you on track are essential. But you really do need to be paying a bit more attention. Summertime, as I said, when you can see it, it's a bit easier. But, wintertime, a lot of it tends to be hidden. Going to the toilet in the snow, again, it's sort of something that, it's not the most attractive topic to talk about, but really you can't just dig a hole in the snow and bury your toilet waste, because as soon as the snow melts, it's going to be there in the spring and summer.
Ew.
So, you need to come prepared if you are going to be camping overnight. And as Gary suggested, if you're starting out, be camping near huts that have toilets, make things much easier. Or else come prepared to pack out all your waste with you. Something he mentioned that I hadn't actually thought about was the fact that, you were essentially in a big fridge. So taking meat and taking things like ice cream or even making jelly is something you wouldn't really think about on a normal camping trip. But it gives you the option in these colder conditions. But you do need to come prepared for that as far as cooking. And you do need to be conscious about what you're eating and how much effort you're willing to put in. I'm pretty lazy. As much as I love food, I'm pretty lazy on my cooking. I'd rather just boil water, add it to a bag and let it rehydrate. But that really is a personal preference.
Yeah, I think, that kind of adds an interesting perspective to doing backcountry touring. If, you can cook up some different food and you can enjoy something a little bit more social, might actually take your mind off from feeling so cold. I don't know. You can tell that it'd be a long time before I get to sleep in a tent in the middle of the snow. I'm happy to do the day trips, but I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure about sleeping in a tent in the snow.
Now, next we talked to Bruce Easton from Wilderness Sports. And again, we talked to Bruce last week about snowshoeing. Wilderness Sports also take out people for ski touring. And they also take people out and teach them how to snow camp as well. So, if it's something that is new to you, and again, from my perspective, I've camped in snow, but I've never actually gone into the snow fields to camp. Certainly from my perspective, certainly the first or second time, I'd probably like to go with an organised group or go with a tour operator just to make sure that we're shown the ropes and shown to what we can and can't do.
And that really applies for us to almost anything that we do. When we were rock climbing, when we were mountaineering, when we were snowshoeing a few weeks ago. Our preference is always to seek out a guide and to get a better sense of how to do it well from the very beginning, rather than necessarily stumble in.
Okay, so we hope this has provided you with a bit of overview of backcountry snow sports. Again, it doesn't just mean skiing. It can mean, it could even mean snowshoeing and tenting as you go. So it really does provide you with some options. But if you are interested in going out and trying to get away from the resorts and spend a couple of nights out in the snow, certainly Wilderness Sports are a good option to help you do that. And we'll have their contact information in the show notes for this podcast. And it'd be worthwhile, if you are interested, contact them to see if they can offer you something that you hadn't really thought about before. Now, just as a final thing for this episode, Wilderness Sports in Jindabyne has been kind to donate a very generous prize for our newsletter subscribers. And to be in the chance to win this prize, you need to be a newsletter subscriber and to receive the newsletter, which will be sent out by email on the 1st of September. All we need you to do is be a subscriber, answer a couple of questions, and you'll go in the draw to win this prize. Okay, that's all for this week's episode, and the last of our wintertime snow episodes. We hope you've enjoyed this, and we hope this has provided you with a different alternative to getting out bush when the weather is a bit colder and there's lots of snow about. That's all for this week. Bye for now.
And bye from me.